Three people are spotlit on a Zoom screen. Ōshin Jennings Sensei, a white man wearing a monk's robes and okesa. Tess Wenderski, a white femme-presenting person with brown hair in a bun and a black long-sleeve top. And Shodo Spring Sensei, a white woman with a shaved head, wearing robes and a brown okesa. After the introduction, Ōshin is off-screen, leaving Shodo, who is speaking, and Tess, who is interpreting, into ASL.
An unsurpassed, penetrating, and perfect Dharma is rarely met with, even in 100,000 million kalpas. Having it to see and listen to, remember and accept, I vow to taste the truth of the Tathagata's words.
Oh, excuse me. I am so happy to be here with you, to see Ōshin again and to see all of you. There was one tiny mistake. I have not written several books. I have written 2 books, but I have written several essays, and one of those was called When the World is on Fire. I'll get back to that later. It's always fun to listen to my life story as it comes through other people, through words that I wrote myself. So that was the only mistake, except the fact that my dream of making a community here is a little shaky right now. I'm getting tired of doing all the work myself. So anyway, I was asked to describe myself physically for people who can't see. So I'm a white woman with a shaved head wearing robes and a brown okesa. And I don't know that there's anything else to say. So, my name sign comes from, I spent a year as a county social worker working in hearing impaired services. And someone said, you better get yourself a name sign or people will give you one and you might not like it. So my first name then was Cedar, and so I named myself Cedar Tree. And that was a long time ago. And my sign language now is pathetic. Anyway, I was going to tell you my whole story, and now I don't want to. I have this problem. I like to be spontaneous. Oh, let me say a few words about that walk. I was engaged in priest training and studying with Okumura Roshi in Indiana. And I went to do my 2 official training angos, ANGO practice periods. And when you begin, you sit, zazen, for a while. And sometime during that first sitting period, I started seeing pictures on the wall, or, of myself walking through the Great Plains. And the pictures didn't go away. So I spent that whole 3 months digesting them and asking what they meant, talking to teachers. Finally, I talked to my teacher. Making a phone call from Tassajara is very difficult, but I'm so glad you know how to spell that. Anyway, I decided that I should do it. And Okamura Roshi said, don't do it until after you have transmission. So that meant a year. Well, I did the second practice period. I visited my mother and sat with her while she was dying. I don't remember what else I did, except that I started trying to find people who would take this walk with me. Oh, I bought a car and I drove to where I planned to go. I drove up to the Alberta tar sands and joined something called the Healing Walk that they were doing. I was at the fourth one. And then I went out to, Una Stoughton camp. It was a native-led camp resisting another pipeline and resisting basic colonial imperialism in British Columbia. They are still there. They are wonderful. And then I drove home and I started trying to organize what was going to happen and where we were going to go. And I do not remember much about that time. But in the summer, in the following summer, I got together with some people. We started in Bloomington, Indiana, where I had trained. These people with a school bus joined us, and they had 4 bunks in a school bus, and it ran on vegetable oil. And I kind of had in mind a Buddhist walk, and they had kind of in mind a hippie walk. So that walk was very difficult. And we went to the 5th and last tar sands healing walk. We discovered that our presence, we came a few days early and there had been rain and floods. And so instead of having our little retreat, we just worked and worked and worked, helping them clean the place up. And later we learned that we had given them a huge influx of energy because they had been discouraged. So you never know what the results will be. That's just what happened. And then we walked with them. It was one day plus lots of workshops and meetings and things. And then we drove to a place where we stopped. A family hosted us. We did our laundry. There had been a lot of rain. And we started walking. And so we spent, come on, how long? It was 1,700 miles, about 3 months, walking every day. And then stopping and camping and meeting people and talking with people and all kinds of stuff. So that was the summer of 2013. And I never knew what I was doing. I just knew I do it. And before I went, people in my life said, "Are you sure you want to do all this?" And I said, if I didn't, I would spend the rest of my life wondering what would have happened if I did. So I did, and it was hard, and my body got very strong. And when I came back, well, no. So what I felt was, first I was walking and I had a staff, which is not with me at this moment, but everyone carried the staff. If we were walking, somebody was walking with a staff. It was a Jizo staff. So in the Zen tradition. Sometimes I felt like I was receiving energy from the earth. Every time I put my foot down, I could feel the energy. Sometimes I felt like I was giving energy to the earth every time I put my foot down. And towards the end of the walk, I could feel both of those things happening at once. I fell in love with the sky. I fell in love with the Great Plains, which I had not expected. I thought the Great Plains are boring. I like trees. I like mountains. But there we are, the grasses, the little flowers by the side of the road, the sunlight, the way the cows responded to us when we walked by them, and all the people and each other. So I came home. This is funny. I mailed the staff home to my daughter. Somebody gave me a ride so I could get on the bus. And I went on the bus and I arrived in the middle of the night at the bus station in Burnsville, Minnesota. And the station was closed and it was dark, but I knew how to do this. So I just, laid my sleeping bag on the grass in the park by the parking lot. And when the sun came up, it was brilliant. So I called my daughter and said, "You have to look at the sun." And she and my granddaughter were already looking at it. And that was such happiness. And one of the things I realized was that on that walk, I was with a group of people who would stop and look at the sunrise. They would stop and look at the sunset. If there was something beautiful, you just pointed and everybody felt it. And that's not the way most of my life has been. It's more that way now than it had been before. It's like now most of my friends are people who will look at a sunset and who will look at the stars and who will recognize how beautiful, how incredible, or beautiful isn't quite right, but it's very alive. And it was, and then I went and I bought a piece of land, and I thought right away I would have a community of people and we would sit zazen in the morning, and it has not come out that way. Oh well. So there is a story about the beginning of Mountains and Waters Alliance. I was, in my first year or so, following my teacher's practice, which is to sit a 5-day sesshin every month. And those sesshins are just sitting, no talks. And if I'm the only one there, I sit anyway. So very early on, someone was buying the land next to me. And to me, that was a wild space. But there it was, and they were going to build a house. And I was thinking about maybe I should get out of there because it was going to be ruined because these people were building a house in my wilderness. At the end, the last day of the next sesshin, I went and I walked through the part that I thought of as endangered. And I asked the trees to help protect themselves. I asked the rocks to protect themselves. I asked the soil to protect themselves. I asked the shrubs and the grasses, including the poison ivy, including the buckthorn. And I'm sure the buckthorn knew I wanted to pull it out, but I asked them anyway. And after a few hours, I could feel them answering. I didn't hear words. I just felt something radiating from all those beings. And then I was able to sleep again. And a year and a half later, I learned that the zoning had been changed. Of course, that was a trick. There is a building site over there right now. But by the time I learned that, it was too late. I had become committed. I had altars in all 4 directions. I had talked to the spirits of the water, and I'd been visiting the rocks, and I'd done a lot of work with gardens and the house and things. So I accepted it. But that story, it's funny because all of Mountains and Waters Alliance is built on this story, which turned out to be a trick. I have been told that if you get involved with the spirits, they are not following your personal agenda. You are following their agenda. So I stayed. Now, let me see. Okay, so I'm going to tell you where I am right now because I'm in recovery from another trip. I wrote the book, which is its own story. And then I traveled, I did the East Coast and gave lots of talks, mostly in Zen centers and a few bookstores and some Quaker group and so forth. And I would have given you a talk then, but I had a mix-up in communications with Ōshin, and then my phone died. And he came all the way down to Washington, D.C. to visit me, and we met in person, and it was so wonderful. I'm so happy. Now we're actually friends. But and then because I had been so busy with the book, I needed more retreat time and I needed help. So I went to Green Gulch Farm, where I've spent some years, and I got sick with the incense. So it was not what I had in mind when I said I need a retreat. I did catch up on my sleep. This is not important. It's just like, again, you don't know what you're going to get. I asked for rest. And I asked to be able to be clear about what I'm doing next. And I didn't get rested, but clarity is beginning. So right now, it's like, I never want to take another long car trip again. And I never want to take a long bus trip again. And I was so looking forward to coming home and being able to take charge of my space. Two roommates just left. And now, and boy, there's a lot of work to do. So I do not know what I'm doing, but it was really a treat to get ready for this talk and to read my old words and remember this piece of what I'm doing. So now I'm going to talk about how the book came to be. There was a thing that I noticed. So I've been an environmentalist forever. And I took a permaculture class in 2006. And what I learned then was that we already know how to stop climate change. We have all the tools. We know everything we need to know. And I learned this while I was in priest training. So realizing this thing about what's possible made me think what we need is consciousness change. I'm in the right business. So I continued my priest training. And I watched as all the obvious, easy things were not being done. I watched people get depressed. I watched environmentalists are often really depressed and hopeless and in despair about human nature. I wasn't in despair, but when I started working on the book, I was able to put words on that. Our human history, our ancestors did not live the way we live now. And there's still a few people in the world who live another way too. The way we live now is to think that we are in charge of everything, which means we have a lot of power, and it means we have the right. And it also means that we're alone. So whatever happens, we have to do it by ourselves. This is really stupid and is totally un-Buddhist. But it's one thing to say the Buddhist teachings say this, and it's another thing to say historians, archaeologists, anthropologists, and sociologists have been studying and documenting that this is not true. They've been recording other ways that people have lived for thousands of years. You know, for maybe 8,000 of years, maybe the beginning of industrial agriculture. We have lived this way in which we don't take care of each other, we exploit the earth, we hurt everybody. A very selfish, greedy way to live. So the second part of my book looks into how we have thought humans are and how humans really are. It gives stories both from recent history and from distant places and from thousands of years ago. And I notice that when people read this, they get encouraged, because we are not just the people who destroyed everything. We're also the people who lived for 10,000 years in a place and made it better. So, but we have to be willing not to be in charge. We have to be willing to take care of us. And our culture in particular has refused to do it. It's kind of suicidal. So while I was looking into this, I spent a lot of time reading about how we got here, and I did some summaries on how we got here and some of our modern language. I have a whole chapter on cost-benefit analysis. If you go back far enough, even just to the Middle Ages, if something was wrong, it shouldn't be done. Now, I'm not going to claim that people in the Middle Ages had their morality right, but somewhere, the Renaissance is a disaster. And it was during the Renaissance that we started to have this idea that thinking made us everything, that humans were more important than nature, and that only humans count. Of course, only humans probably meant only white men, but whatever. So we have the idea now that we have the right to do anything we want. And we have another idea that says all the other ways of living are terrible. If I can't have air conditioning, that's awful. If I can't have a car, that's terrible. So instead of visible slavery like this country had, 170 years ago and before, we have invisible slavery where there are child slaves mining the minerals that are used in our cell phones. And how can you get by without a cell phone? So this is not the only way to live. Some people opt out. Some people try to opt out completely, live on the land without stuff. Oops, there's my cell phone. I'm talking to you on this laptop, and I'm in the country, so I don't have very good connection. So I never know if I will actually disappear from you. And, what are we going to do? I am attempting to be more connected to people who are local to me, to people that I could, if I had to, walk to. I made sure that I was within walking distance of one of my children's families. It would take me a few days, but I could do it. And there's this part of me waiting for the crash, and it's worse now. While I was on that retreat at Green Gulch Farm, while I was being sick, I was reading the internet. So I learned about Renee Good. And then I learned about Alex Preddy. And then I learned about ICE agents smashing in car windows, imprisoning people, beating people up. I will not go on. And while I was sitting in California, lying in my bed a lot, I was watching as the people of Minneapolis became heroes for doing nonviolent resistance and for standing up for their communities. In my own community, there are people who are, um, they're guarding at schools, or they're walking children to school so their parents don't get picked up because of taking people at schools. Um, they're bringing food to people because people are afraid to go out shopping. And basically, mostly it's people with brown skins that this happens to. But both Renee and Alex were white people. They just said the wrong thing. They weren't subservient enough. Okay, so I'm living in that world and asking myself, exactly what part am I going to play here? So there's a question. So last fall, this was starting to happen, but it hadn't hit Minneapolis yet. And I said to myself, I spent 6 years working on the book. I need to follow it through. And I said to myself, well, I said to Ivan Illich said to me, I don't know if people know that name, Ivan Illich. He was a radical priest, I think, in Brazil, who closed the food shelf and went out to do something else. And he wrote and taught a lot. And what he said was, neither revolution nor reformation can ultimately change a society. Rather, you must tell a new powerful tale, one so persuasive that it sweeps away the old myths and becomes the preferred story. One so inclusive that it gathers all the bits of our past and our present into a coherent whole. One that even shines some light into the future so that we can take the next step. So the book is my attempt to tell a story. And it's the story that we know in Buddhism. So now I'm going to talk about that story, which is what's really fun. Let's see. So parts 3 and 4 of the book are all about what are we going to do anyway. So I talk about various practical things, which I won't do now, just like I am not going into any detail about these stories that I so enjoyed collecting. But so this is my version of Buddhism. And I've noticed everybody has their thing about Buddhism, so this is mine. Everything lives us. Everything breathes us into life. Everything witnesses us into being. And we, in turn, live, breathe, and witness them into existence. Dogen wrote about this exactly in, Gigi Uzumai, Jiuyuzammai, which was his description of Zazen. It was his instructions and his sales pitch, why you should do this. So we look at each other, and by looking, we create each other. And everything else looks at us and creates us. So there are words for this way of seeing life. One of those words is animism. One of those words is panpsychism, which in detail is the one I like the best, but it says everything is conscious. Everything. Not just humans, not just animals, not even just plants, not even just rocks and rivers and stars, everything. So, whatever that means, we think we know what consciousness means, but we don't. But if everything is conscious and everything has agency, we live in a world that's completely different from the world that we have been taught. Now, I propose that this is a Buddhist understanding of the world. If I didn't think it was, I would probably still think this and say, oh, well, Buddhism. But I love that Buddhism has carried this way of seeing the world, of regarding the world, seeing, hearing, smelling, tasting, touching, feeling, through centuries. We inherit a tradition that is very old and I believe has been designed to carry this way of being in the world through modern civilization, through all kinds of horrific things. This is the gift. This is the Buddha's gift to us, passed down through the ancestors. And it can be our gift to the world. So, I never know what I'm going to say. And so I keep having to change it. Here's the thing. So when I wrote Open Reality, there's a chapter that says changing the structure of reality. And that borders on heresy because Zazen is a good for nothing. But I'm going to say Zazen and Zen practice put us into a different relationship with our world. There is a word, okay, another story. Teijo Munich, Teijo Munnich. So she was teaching as I was studying, and she would give talks. And she looked deeply into things. So there was a word for Zazen, and she looked up the characters for that word. Oh, because somebody translated this word as play, and she said, that can't be right. Sitting, not moving, looking at a wall. That can't be play. So the word was made up of two characters, and the first character meant play, and the second character meant play. And so she had to come to terms with Zazen is play. Now, I think this has something to do with that Zazen is good for nothing. Okamura Roshi once said to me, back when I really wanted to be enlightened, he said, if you're sitting Zazen to get enlightened, you're still doing business. Okay. So out of doing business into play. And this, of course, is not only when we're on the cushion. This, of course, is our entire life. And everything around us says you should do business. You should make more money. If you didn't this, and this, well, your life isn't worth anything. Well, in the corporate world, it may not be. But what makes life worth living? So, okay, so I wrote a chapter called Changing the Structure of Reality. And I tried to say, what we're doing in practice is getting into the level of understanding in which everything is energy, everything is consciousness. And, okay, so now I'm going to talk about why this works. So what it is about changing the rules or changing the language that we use to understand the universe. So I wrote, there are rules that say only the mundane exists and there is no sacred. Those are human rules and meditation changes them. We can undo the Renaissance, and we want to. Like why we'd want to, I don't know. But if you like watching children play, or if you've ever envied a child who's playing, that's what I'm talking to. Meditation creates an opening in which everything is open and flexible. Things are allowed to be as they are. Things create each other. In meditation, it's possible to receive the creation of all the other beings of the universe, not just the devas, but the rocks and waters too. So we sit zazen and we can enter that consciousness. Or even if like our mind is racing a mile a minute, it's like we disengage the gears. And so we're in that space whether we know it or not. And that again goes back to Dogen. Okay, I have a chapter where I explain why I said meditation, but I meant zazen. So I don't have to tell you about that. Mm. Mm. For millennia, people lived lives immersed in nature and the sacred. This was true in the times of gathering and hunting, of nomadic pastoralists and small farmers. There is power in that connection. Just as deep meditation changes you, and thus also your community, communal joy and ritual transform a people. propose that this is the power of life. It's like the power of a healthy immune system to defeat infection, and we are infected. I propose that we begin to act as they did, recognize the earth as our home and all beings as our family. Treat them well, work for their well-being, and partner with them in the common cause of the well-being of all of life. So when I thought the Mountains and Waters Alliance, I imagined that there would be groups of people, local groups of people scattered around the world. And those people, some of them would sit zazen together. They would have potlucks. They would do rituals of all different kinds. I don't care what kind of rituals you do. And in each place, it's like a little spark of warmth, light, life, a little space of healing. That's my dream. Mm-hmm. Okay. One more to read. Oh, come on. Okay. I can't find the page. So what I said was ask for help. What I spend most of my practice energy and teaching energy these days is proposing. We're not alone. We belong here just as much as the trees and the ants. This is our home. We can act as if it's our home, and we can ask for help. There was that great story heard long ago of a boy who's trying to fix his bike. And he starts to get upset and he says to his dad, I've tried everything and it still doesn't work. And his dad says, you haven't tried everything. And the boy says, what? And the dad says, you haven't asked your dad for help yet. We are the one time when I asked for help and I got answered. There have been some other times, and they lead me to have confidence even in this very hard time. I really want my grandchildren to live in a better world than the one they grew up in. And right now, it's looking worse. And here's the question, what do we do? So I start with, so we have to become willing to ask for help, which is why I talk about recognizing that we're just one of the crowd, we belong here. And then we have to ask, and then we have to do it again. And there are so many ways. I mean, going on sesshin or going to a practice period or doing any of our practices, we could see those as a way of throwing ourselves on the mercy of Avalokiteshvara. Because that's where we live. We live in that mercy. And we can allow ourselves to notice it. I'll say that. And then I'll stop for questions or comments.